this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. Everything is good here. And even though the show's a little bit staggered, Halloween hasn't happened yet. By the way, I'm going to go back on my word. I am going to do a Halloween show, but I'm not going to live stream it because, you know, what's that saying? Life gets in the way. But I am going to do it with Henry, my wingman, and I'm going to have, this is my third year, a Halloween version. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do this year is, instead of doing the Halloween that I did last year, I'm going to look at the next day, which between November 1st and 2nd, what they call All Saints Day and their Day of the Dead. It's like a 2-day celebration depending on what culture, which, by the way, a lot of people think because, you know, the sugar skulls and everything have become so predominant here in the United States that it's like a Mexican, but in reality that All Saints and a Day of the Innocents and everything, which is basically a day to remember the family members that have passed away. This predates way back into European, um, history, because mostly, as a matter of fact, into Roman times, where obviously they didn't have Halloween, but there was, in other words, a day where families were meant to remember their dead and appease them. In other words, the thought was that if you had a loved one that you remembered and whatever the culture was, they would be okay. And that mostly these ghosts and these things that were around were people, human spirits, whatever you want to call them, that had been abandoned, that nobody remembered them, or that they died violently, that kind of thing, secretly, whatever, murdered, and that nobody um, basically remembered them or honored them or had a family, that they were like the forgotten ones. That's originally where this idea came from, of honoring and remembering your dead. And in some cases, they even have things for the ones that have been forgotten, just in case. It's like, hey, don't take it up with us, because there was always what they considered these souls that were wandering because nobody took care of them, that kind of deal. But anyway, that's mostly, even though I'm going to have my ghost stories and we're going to talk about a bunch of other things more current. But yeah, that's what the Halloween show is going to be next week. Now, let me get on to the good part. The good part is who is the guest this week for Stories of the Supernatural. And this is the first time that he's been here. His name is Ron Felber. All right. And you know what? We're going to have a lot to talk about. He was educated at Georgetown University. He's written fiction and nonfiction books, including El Dottore, The Double Life of a Mafia Doctor, Mojave, writing stories for True Detective magazine while working as a federal marshal. He teaches creative writing at Drew University's Caspersen School of Graduate Studies. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Ron?
Just fine, Marlene. Good to be here.
Well, before we get into this, we spoke briefly before we started recording. How did you get involved? Because it sounds like you have a law enforcement background. How did you get involved in this area?
Well, actually, I've been writing since I was a kid. And the 6th grade, I had one of those teachers that said, you have an interesting way of expressing yourself in writing. And so I started writing short stories. And really, the reason I was in law enforcement for a period of time, maybe 3 years or so, was because when I got out of college, which was Georgetown, I was in Washington, D.C., and it was very difficult to get a job. These were the days when there were gas lines and
Oh,
there was
yes, I
deep
remember that.
recession. And so jobs were hard to come by. And so they were paying a little extra money to people that went into law enforcement with a degree, and they allowed you to go to graduate school at night, and they would pay for it.
Wow, yeah, there was once upon a time where employers would do that.
So
Yes.
that was the lure for me. But I've been writing for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, I got a scholarship to Marquette University for a short story I wrote in as a senior in high school,
Wow.
and then from there I transferred to Georgetown, and I've been writing. I think I had my first book published when I was 22, 23. So
Wow.
yeah,
And that for those people, he's talking about the times when there was no self-publishing. In other
that's
words,
right.
unless you got your manuscript, okayed by I guess a printing house or an editor or something, it would be sorry, what is it? That it's interesting, but thanks, but no thanks kind of letter. So
I could wallpaper my apartment with letters like that.
that's what I'm saying. This was not the time where, hey, don't worry, I'll self-publish. That didn't exist back then. It
Yeah, no, it
was
didn't. It didn't. But
so.
actually, I have to say, one of the things that was good about those days is when you did get a book through
Mm-hmm.
that system, which wasn't easy. They really supported it, and it
Sure.
was a marketing effort, and there were professionals that got behind it, and that was one of the good things about it. But it was tough. I think it was easier to get into Harvard University than to
Yes,
get a
it
book
was people
published.
don't understand, and
Yeah,
also some of the people that make the decisions on this, they would get so many manuscripts
absolutely.
that unless you had something really good going out the gate, forget it.
Yeah.
They'd get rid of it. And but back then also, this was when there were smaller bookstores, and like you said, they would promote you and
Or
all
you
that
can do
stuff.
book signings. No, I mean, I have to say, if there's one of the things that I miss, the online things, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc., are all well and good, but there's
Hmm.
still nothing like going to a little bookshop
Oh
in the
my
city
God,
somewhere
yes.
and being
Yes.
able to browse through the shelves. And
Hmm.
sometimes, maybe you remember, they had little step ladders even, where there
Yes.
were shelves and then there were shelves on top.
Yes.
So, I mean, you
Yes.
had a huge variety of books, some brand new, some old, some classics, and it was a treat.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was different. Like you had they had the Waldens, which was a smaller but a chain, but you still had your mom and pop bookstores, and they
Yes,
specialized sometimes, and they could also find you out of print books or hard to find books and things like that.
exactly.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
there were
That
great,
was
great discussions that would revolve
oh
around
oh
those
of
books, right?
course.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, 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 yes. And then everything. Yeah, I'm gonna refer real quick to Hollywood because everybody's. I don't. You remember that early movie You Got Mail that was with Tom
sure.
Hanks and the whole thing. The background story is she's a little lone woman
Hmm.
bookstore owner, and he's the big, kind of like Barnes and Noble
Yeah,
kind of.
ready to buy her out and
And
do
that's
away with her
exactly what
business.
happened. She
Yes,
bought her out, and this was back in the '90s. I can't remember when that movie came out or
yeah.
whatever. And it
Hmm.
was like, yeah, that is exactly what
That's
happened.
exactly what happened. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, I
so.
must say, from another standpoint, the uh, the really good thing about these days is there's so many outlets in terms of electronic media. By that I mean television with all the
Yes.
stations. So a writer, let's say a writer of books or screenplays, there's really a lot of avenues, and in a lot of ways, it reminds me of the '50s when guys like Rod Serling and Patty
Mm.
Chayefsky and so many Ira Levin, so many great writers. It was the golden age of television. But this right now is kind of the golden age of television in the sense that they're looking for content, and writers can get their work shown.
Right, even if you're like, yes, even if you're not in I'm thinking of the word the click or whatever,
Yes,
you can
yes,
still, if you get exposed and you get something out there and it's liked, and then before you know it, what's that word? It goes viral. But still, anyway, I absolutely agree. And yeah, there's always an up and a downside to things like that.
yes.
So you went into, and I understand totally, you went into law enforcement because it was like, hey, I got to do what I got to do.
But the other thing is, I got great stories. I was I
Yes.
was I was transporting federal prisoners. I was transporting hitmen. I
Oh
met
my
guys
God.
that killed 78 people.
Yeah.
I transported terrorists. I transported serial killers. So, I mean, then I wrote stories for True Detective magazine.
Hmm.
So,
And
I
don't
mean,
these guys like sometimes even to talk about themselves? It's really funny, but you always think they're going to be there, and sometimes they'll talk.
yes.
They'll tell you a story here and there. I'm sure.
Well, one time, well, it's surprising. It depends how long they've been in prison, I suppose. But
Yeah, no,
one time I interviewed a guy. His name was Jesse Martin, and he was a hitman. And so I was going to do an article called, because his middle name was James. I was going to put Jesse James
James.
Martin,
Okay.
a modern day outlaw. So I went into this guy's cell and I'm talking to him, and he had fought a guy named Sonny Liston, who was this brute of a guy. So he was a former boxer and a hitman. So that's a good combination, I suppose. So I'm sitting across from him in a cell, and I said, "So how much did you use to get to kill somebody, Jesse?" He said, "Well, I've killed people for $5,000. I've killed people for $500." So I had a kind of a rapport that I thought I'd established with him. I said, "So you would kill somebody like me for $500?" He said, "I'd kill you for $200."
It's like thanks. I think it's so. I guess what the fee would go up if the person was more notorious, or like
I
if you
have
were.
no idea. All I know is
I
that
mean, it was like okay. Well,
all
that
I
kind
knew
of
is
got you at the
I
arm and the
said,
knees, right?
guard, let me out of here.
Now only a $200 hit. But you know what? I think sometimes, like you said, some of these guys, I don't know what he was in there or what he was sentenced. Once they're convicted, and it's like, how many life, let's say,
Exactly.
let's,
He was serving something like he was in for like 21 murders. So he had,
right, he's never going to see the light of
yeah, he
day.
was serving 700 years or something.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, even if I get any of these thrown out, I still got plenty of
Which
life.
makes them incredibly dangerous, by the way.
Oh, yes,
They have
yes.
absolutely nothing to lose.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I hear that a lot of them, those are the
Yeah.
ones that do it fellow
Well, of
inmates.
course. Or cops.
Yes,
Huh?
anybody that
Guards.
they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, what are you gonna do? What, what? Give
The
me
worst
another
they
life
can do is
term?
get 21 days in solitary confinement. It's the worst that
Right.
can happen to them.
Yes, and then
Mhm.
eventually they get out
Yeah.
because, but no, yeah, they kind of do it themselves, and it's really funny because sometimes they have the pecking order inside these prisons
Yeah.
where
Oh,
there's
for
some
sure.
stuff that I imagine snitches and things like that.
Yeah.
They
And I could
eventually
tell you
get
some
got.
stories about that, but that's not why we're here.
Right, right. No, that's what I heard. That even when Jeffrey Dahmer got killed, by another inmate, that
Yeah.
was supposedly the whole thing was, even though they didn't say it, it was. I don't know. There's debate whether it was because of what he had done as a criminal, or that basically that he had been that there was like a death hit list or something like that, and
Yeah.
his name was
Wouldn't
on it.
surprise me. Yeah.
You know, and they were family. Later on, they were asking like little family and even his attorneys, and they were like, "Yeah, we kind of anticipated that this would be his end once he
But,
got into prison."
but I'll tell you something. The story we'll talk about a little later, which is
Okay.
about demonic possession. I came to a theory about all of that based on some
Mm-hmm.
of these people that I met.
Right.
And some of the people that I met, in my view, this is personal and all like that. So I'm not asking anybody else to think the same way.
Right.
But I believe that at some point in time, people can become literally the devil. I think they can
Mm-hmm.
become possessed, and I think
Yeah.
that they can become the walking, talking, living, breathing uh,
Mm-hmm.
satanic presence on earth.
Yeah.
And
And
I've
you
met guys
see,
that I think are exactly that.
people think sometimes that when people are either obsessed or possessed, that they're walking around 24/7 like that. And sometimes they're not. They have, and I'm not going to say because I know some of they can you, but you will have people that do horrible things, and sometimes they'll say, "I can't remember
Yeah.
what I did." Like in
Yes.
other words, like they're not
Missing
there,
time. It's like missing time.
like missing time.
Hmm.
They'll remember to hear, and then in between, usually when the crime or whatever it is, which is usually very heinous, then they
Hmm.
come and they'll say, "I can't remember."
But actually, Lizzie Borden was that way. Lizzie
Yeah.
Borden, who in Fall Church, Massachusetts, murdered her parents. The
Mm-hmm.
same. I mean, she was very at ease because she literally had no memory of doing it. She was acquitted, but anybody that was really involved in the case understood that she was the murderess.
Well, this is what's really funny. What I've heard, because I've read it like I guess like everybody else was that while she was in during the trial period, she was had the support of her church because she was a
Hmm.
regular churchgoer, which was
School
just really
teacher.
fun. Then once she got acquitted, all her church friends, everybody went, no, no more Lizzie. Like hey,
Sure,
and
sure.
it's really funny because she got acquitted, but it's like maybe amongst themselves, I don't know, something
They
got
knew.
out. Like
They
yes,
knew. Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the characters in this Clara Fowler story
uh
is a
huh,
guy named Rufus Hilliard, Rufus Bassett Hilliard, and he was the chief investigator for the Lizzie Borden murders. But what most people don't know is 4 months later, there was another axe murder. A farm worker murdered a woman named Manchester exactly the same way. These two murders were within 4 miles of the same area
mm-hmm,
within a couple of months,
right,
and Fall River had not had any murders in 50 years.
wow.
And prior
What's
to
what?
that, actually, and this is sort of the basis of this Clara Fowler story, Rufus Bassett Hilliard was convinced that John Fowler murdered his two babies, uh, and wanted Clara Fowler, who's the main character of this Clara Fowler story, to testify against her father. And so he was very much involved, even to the point where, believe it or not, while he was pursuing this fellow Coriaro, the second axe murderer that was in Falls River, Jack the Ripper wrote a letter to him. It's in the
What?
museum. It's in the museum in Fall River, suggesting, that there may be more than one murderer.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I know. I
I
did a
you
lot of
you always
research
hear of
for
him
this case.
writing to the police in London.
Yeah.
The detectives.
He wrote to Bassett Hilliard in Fall River to give him advice about the case. It's a pretty
But let me
crude
ask you
letter.
something. Wasn't there also a few years before that in an adjacent property, some of Lizzie's family, I can't remember if it was a cousin or
Mm.
a grandmother, a great, that she basically killed her children and herself?
I'm
Ah,
not. I'm not aware of that.
okay. It'll come to me because I
Yes.
know that it was like one of those things where everybody was thinking, well, man, was there maybe some type of mental illness in the family?
No. You know what there was? There was a satanic cult in Fall River.
Is it okay? You're not the only one that's told me, but I always thought it was more modern,
No,
more
that
modern
happened.
times.
Actually, Fall River has quite a history. But going back to the 1890s, 1885, 1890, early 1900s, there was a satanic cult. And actually, if you look at it, and let's say that evil is a real thing,
Right.
Fall River was like an epicenter of some kind
Like
of,
the hotbed.
yeah, it was, right?
And it's what was it in the 18, I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Was I don't want to say if it was Fall River, it was in the adjacent area of Ephraim Avery. He was a minister and he was accused of murdering this girl. Her name was Sarah. Oh, Marlene, what was her last name?
Hmm.
Bottom line, he was like a. And you know what they talk first? If you look at the pictures, back in those times, they would do illustrations in the newspapers.
Yes.
They have illustrations of him surrounded by little demons. Because even though he was acquitted in two trials,
Hmm.
you know, there was many people that thought that he had actually
Exactly.
killed this girl that was pregnant by him.
Uh-huh.
He was kind of leading.
Exactly. And actually that has a lot to do with all of this in terms of the Fowler case. This is a true case of demonic possession that was actually documented by William James. Henry James, the famous writer. His
Yes,
brother was a Harvard Medical School professor and really sort of the inventor, if you want to call it that, of abnormal psychology. He was the first person in the United States to teach abnormal psychology in a medical school, Harvard.
right.
And his the other one of the other doctors involved was Morton Prince, Dr. Morton Prince, who again was one of the pioneers in abnormal psychology and psychotherapy.
Okay.
And also involved was a fellow named Richard Hodgson, that's who studied this case, this woman, who was president of the Society of Psychical Research in America, and Leonora Piper, who was a clairvoyant, They formed a
Okay.
team to study this woman, and it's extraordinary.
Let me ask you because did they how's this? Because back then, this was around with spiritualism, everybody,
Very
got,
big, yeah. Hmm.
you know, especially after the Civil War and everything is when
Correct.
it because of there was so many loss of life, people lost sons, fathers, brothers. Um
In Europe at the time, in Europe, there were 7 million spiritualists.
that's a lot of
In America,
spiritualists.
there was like Arthur Conan Doyle, Madame
Mhm.
Curie, and Pierre, her husband, who worked with X-rays, etc., scientists. So this was something that was really in the air, and it wasn't just superstition.
Right.
Intellectuals, really well
Yes.
educated, well reasoning
Yes.
people believed in spiritualism and the existence of a uh, of a non-corporal world.
Right. The mystery schools and everything
Yes.
had taken off. And what's really funny, that I've seen some that even in France during this time, what they call the Belle Epoque,
Hmm.
they had a bunch of schisms, like even a priest that became Satanist. It was like, what is this?
Yes.
They all went the left hand path totally.
Yeah.
Not so much as even going into mystery school or theosophist or whatever.
Right.
They came out and out um, Satan or
Well, they
would
had
do
black
black
masses.
masses.
Black masses were very
Black
prevalent.
masses, yeah. And people
Hmm.
don't think that that was happening. It was like, yeah,
Yeah.
for all the Victorian times, the straight laced, and very proper. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Sure. Sure. Actually, William James again, who was really one of the founders and fathers of modern psychiatry. His wife was a spiritualist and very much involved with seances, etc. Yeah.
This is and so this story. How did you come upon this story or decide to write about it?
This was really something. I was a student at Georgetown when they were filming The Exorcist.
Okay, oh,
So,
wonderful.
so yeah, it was like it was sort of a little phenomenon. Everybody thought it was kind of cool. Nobody
Right,
really paid that much attention to it, but there were cameras all over the place. But for
right.
me as a writer, I had at that time my first novel. So I was
Okay,
this guy with the manuscript, the 500 pages of yellow papered uh,
yeah,
typed paper, and I wanted William Peter Blatty to read it because I wanted to be a writer. And I
right.
figured, well, if William Peter Blatty, who's the hottest writer in the country at the moment, likes it, maybe he'll send it to his publisher, and I'll get my book published. So I pretty much uh, tried every way I could to meet him, but of course they're filming. This is
Right.
a multi-million-dollar production, so it's not like you go over and meet this guy. But I did find out that he had an office across the Potomac River, across the Key Bridge in Arlington, Virginia, at a Marriott. So he had rented a floor and he had a secretary and like that. So I went there with my manuscript, of course. I meet the admin or the secretary that he had. He's not there. Nobody's there. I guess they're filming or working on things. So I said, I'm a writer. I'm a student here. I have this manuscript. And, I'm really hoping that Mr. Blatty will take a look at it. And she turned around and said, just look at this. And behind her were stacks of manuscripts from all over the world.
And you were like,
France,
oops. And that's
Germany, England, all over the place, stacks.
yeah,
She
that must
goes,
have been
well, I'll put it in the stack. I said, no, 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 you can't do that. I said, tell Bill Blatty that I know he grew up in the Bronx, New York. I know
you were
that
you
he was, you know, not rich. He was poor. I know that he got a scholarship to Georgetown. Well, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and I had a scholarship. And my father was a beer truck driver. Well, it's not like we had any money. And I'm here on scholarship. He wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer. I'm just like him. Tell
right.
him that.
Yeah,
so,
do me a solid.
so she goes, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell him that. And I'll ask him if he wants to see the manuscript. And if he says yes, I'll give it to him. I said, I guess, and I had no hope that she would even do it, actually. But
Right.
she promised she would, and I made her promise she would. So I go back to New Jersey for Thanksgiving vacation. So I'm with my parents for Thanksgiving, and I get a phone call, and it's William Blatty.
Wow.
And he says, I remember so vividly. I read every word of your manuscript. So I said, well, that's pretty good, I guess. He said, and I like it. He goes, you have the brains and the will to be a fine writer. He said, so why don't you come by when you come back, and we'll talk about it. So we struck up a friendship, and that particular manuscript he didn't help me with because it was too personal, first novel, all like that.
Right.
And but he did help me with a second. But he said, I have a story, and this is the quote. I have the quote. He actually said, "This is a hugely influential account that qualifies as jaw-dropping." He said, "All the research is at the Harvard Medical School. I was going to write it, but I'm on to other things. I want to do something different. So let me pass that along. I'll call the librarian. You'll get a pass to see all the papers between the doctors and this girl from Radcliffe College, who was
Okay.
21 at the time, who came to Dr. Prince and William James and some others. They formed a team around her because she was displaying all the symptoms of demonic possession. And this case actually went on from 1898 to 2004, and it was
What?
completely documented. Letters between them, letters in the demon's hand to
Okay.
her, threatening her.
Okay.
Just transcripts, because they had a stenographer that took notes.
Right.
So it was a real and true study of
Let me ask you
demonic.
something because it sounds, were any of these, I mean, besides being, were any of them Catholic? Because, in The Exorcist, it ended up in the hands of Catholic priests. No, right?
No. They did have an exorcism, uh,
Okay.
but it wasn't performed by the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was really done by Prince because um, Richard Hodgson, who was the spiritualist on the
Okay.
team, and Leonora Piper, who was a clairvoyant medium, most popular
Okay.
one in the country at the time, and William James and Prince were at odds. The
Okay.
spiritualists, of course, saying this is demonic possession.
Okay.
Prince, who had a rivalry with Sigmund Freud, wanted desperately to prove that this wasn't demonic possession,
Okay. I
that
see.
all of
All
these
right.
things that had gone on for thousands of years he could explain,
Purely psychological.
purely psychological. So there was this tug between the two factions, but that's what made it interesting, because they explored it from all these different points of view.
Okay. Sure.
um, Prince did an exorcism himself using the Catholic rites of
The rights.
exorcism, but he did
Okay.
it for effect.
Okay.
He did it for effect. If this woman who for a large portion of her life was having visitations from Jesus Christ and the Blessed
Mm-hmm.
Virgin, if it,
Right.
and was a saintly sort of figure, if she believed so strongly, and she was Catholic,
That's what I
so
was going to say. She
yeah,
was Catholic.
she was
Okay.
Catholic. She
Mm-hmm.
believed so strongly in this the ability of a demon to possess someone, the
Right.
ability to see Jesus Christ, for example, then the way to cure her was using that same belief to
Right. That
turn it
avenue.
around and to expel this demon, at least in her mind. And so
Right.
that's where the exorcism came in, and the results were astounding, to say the least.
This is so interesting. So this is, she comes, what was she? She was young. When did this, well, how's this? Why her? Was it because she was religious, or how did she end up being
I've got
possessed?
some things from the actual transcript that maybe a little later I'll read. It's a little
Okay.
powerful, and maybe you'll need to edit some things out. I don't know, but
That's fine.
it's very powerful, and it really sort of has the demonic presence explaining exactly why people get possessed.
Right, because there's, everybody always wants to know, well, why that person? Besides the regular, hey, they were a Satanist or they were attending occult rituals. When you get the normal person, when I
Yes,
say a normie,
yes,
why was this person targeted
yeah.
for possession?
In a lot of ways, I think it was because of her saintly disposition.
Okay.
And but as it turned out, I mean, it's like a detective story in a lot of ways. And this is where the marshal from Fall River
Mm-hmm.
comes in, because he explores it from a law enforcement point of view, because there are
Right.
murders involved.
Oh, so there's. I was about to say this sounds like this was a larger circle around besides the people that were basically trying to help her. Sounds like there was something else around her.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
actually, three murders.
Let me ask you, was she at any point was this tied into a satanic group or a coven or
Oh
something out
yes,
there?
yeah, absolutely. Her father was a member of a satanic cult.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, yeah,
Now I get it.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So was she offered in as a child then?
As it turns out, through retrogressive
Mm,
hypnosis,
yeah,
they determined that yes, she had been involved in satanic rituals.
right.
Yeah,
And what
with her parents and others.
right. Well, as a child then is what I'm saying because sometimes and you know what? One time I was speaking to this lady she's gone into the right hand path for many years as she grew up. She was a top tier occultist.
Hmm.
And her family is were top tier occultists. And she basically told me that, you know, that you could do that to your child. In other words, that you would think, well, even though that the parent, they could basically mark the child
Yes.
for possession or give them to a demon.
Yeah. These
They
these were
can.
things that were recovered through hypnosis, because obviously she blocked these out, and perhaps that's what what brought her to a point where she experienced visitations. And basically, these visitations were like comforting visitations, where
Sure.
Jesus Christ will say, "It'll be okay. Things will be all right. You'll get through this." That kind of thing.
Yes. And it's I was a hypnotherapist for many years. I don't do it anymore. So I understand the concept of recovered memories and blocked memories and
Mm-hmm.
amnesia as far as to keep your sanity. A lot of people
Sure.
don't understand that your brain, unless the trauma is so overwhelming that it can't, which sometimes leads to DID, the multiple personality. Usually, that's sometimes, especially if you're a child, this is the way you retain your sanity, is
Right.
to block out that memory.
Exactly. Actually, Morton Prince invented the term dissociation.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So he he again, you've got to realize people have vested interests, like academics and
Oh
scientists and
boy, do
whatnot. Yeah.
academics with a vested interest? What? Are you kidding? No.
So so he wanted to overshadow Sigmund Freud. This was
Okay.
an obsession. His father was mayor of Boston. His brother came from an incredibly wealthy, successful family, and he was looked upon as the least successful of his family. And it was vital to him,
Like I got to do something.
because Freud had insulted him,
Oh, okay.
and he had insulted Freud. He called psychoanalysis, garbage science, that kind of thing, and
Yeah.
wrote articles about it. So Freud hated him, and he hated Freud, and he was obsessed with with overarching Freud's Freud's success and notoriety, and pushing a behavioralist point of view rather than a psychoanalytical point of view.
Yes.
And that argument still goes on between, uh,
Sure.
yeah, in psychiatry. In any case, so he had a vested interest to call this dissociation, but everything, and I've studied this up and down. I've studied this for years and
Okay.
read all the papers. This is probably the most authentic case of demonic possession you could ever have, because was studied so closely, and
And it
there's
wasn't looked at. So let me ask you. So originally, when they start, I want to say, well, treating her,
yes,
they're looking at it purely as a psychological problem.
yeah. As a matter of fact, this is exactly what happened. He was giving her, because she came in with what they called at that time neurasthenia, and
Mm-hmm.
neurasthenia would be a kind of condition where you can't sleep, insomnia, you have no appetite, you have nightmares, you're restless. But for her, it was much worse than that. She had these visions of hell. She
Wow.
had these other visions of Jesus Christ and whatnot, saving her and literally talking, talking to Jesus Christ as a visitation. Same with the Virgin Mary, and and so they looked at it that way. And the idea of the behavioralist position, which is now, is that you can change the pattern of someone's life. So he would hypnotize her finally, because nothing else was working, and give her suggestion. You will sleep well at night. You will be
Okay.
well rested. You will have an healthy appetite. And she would repeat that. You will have a healthy, I will have a healthy appetite. I will sleep well. Suddenly, a voice unlike her own says, she will not sleep well at night.
As in the third person? Is
Yes.
that what you're...
She will not have sleep well in the evening. She will not exercise. And Prince goes, why are you referring to her as
Wow.
she? It is you after all. And there's this brooding silence. And then in a voice, finally, Prince presses him, who are you? Why are you saying this? I hate her. I despise everything she stands for. And in a voice that's totally unlike her, that just shakes the room. And finally, he keeps pressing, who are you? And finally, in this roaring voice, I am the devil.
Oh,
Yeah.
and everybody, but you know what? It's really funny because this was around the time that academics, that science was taking over, where
Mm-hmm.
they really were trying to get away from the devil thing.
Yes. Oh, yeah, exactly.
This was all, this is her mental whatever is going on in her
Yes,
mind.
exactly.
So nobody
Exactly.
went like, oh, what? It was like, oh, she's really, really sick.
But I mean, just to give you, may I read something from the transcript? It's very
Sure,
short.
of course,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So here's what Prince writes. Patient describes presence of contemptuous thing inside her that prevents her from eating, drinking, sleeping for days at a time. After violent convulsions accompanied by grotesque changes in facial features, she speaks in a deep, solemn voice, claiming to be the devil. Cursed be God, she growls, eyes gleaming. Cursed be the Virgin. Cursed be Jesus Christ. Then in a higher voice, the voice of Clara F., with eyes full of tears, it's not my fault if my mouth says these horrid things, she swears. It is not I. It is not I. Yeah.
Wow. See?
Yeah.
So in other
Powerful,
words, she was
powerful stuff.
aware, well, this is when her personality is getting pushed back or out of the way.
She had no memory when she went into this state. So it was like missing time, as we said, with Lizzie Borden and
Uh-huh.
the rest.
Okay.
She didn't she wouldn't know anything that went on during that period. But eventually, what happened was the demonic presence wanted to take over and would do anything to break her down physically.
Okay.
So if she was weak, it could take over the body more easily.
Okay.
And so it took her on long marathon walks, which she had no memory of. She'd walk for miles. She'd be without shoes. She'd find that her dress was torn, you know,
Okay.
and come back exhausted. But this was the demonic presence way of taking control. The weaker she was, the stronger it became, and it knew
How
that.
did they come about? Was there a point where what was it that you said at some point they said, okay, well, nothing else is working. We'll hypnotize her and see if we can figure out why she's, because I'm still thinking they think it's a psychological problem, strictly
Well,
psychological.
Prince and James thought it was a psychological problem, but of course, Hodgson and Leona Piper, the clairvoyant, did not. And this was the debate that went on.
So let me ask you, Leona, Piper is saying, hey, this is she's possessed or
That's right.
she's
Yeah, you're talking to the demon. So, matter of fact, the demon would write letters. So, for example, she was a student. She'd find her her homework ripped up.
okay.
She would find herself atop furniture, naked, piled furniture,
Okay.
paralyzed all night, sitting on
Wow.
top of furniture, so that she'd be exhausted the next day. She'd have visions of demons at the window. She'd have just horrible, horrible conscious experiences. And she'd wake up and find letters. Here's a note that's written to her by the demonic presence. Hypocrite, whore, how I hate you. The pains of hell will come down on thee. You shall find no help, no comfort in heaven or earth from my wrath. not till student Clara is dead and puts a bullet through her head. How long will that be, do you think? Days, weeks? No longer than that, surely. You shall sacrifice yourself at the earliest opportunity. Then you shall be gone, and I shall be forever. Devil, devil, devil.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
something, huh?
did her family imagine here their daughters being treated? Did any of them come forward, or were they just saying, "We don't know
Her,
what happened"?
her mother had died of uh, puerperal fever um,
Okay.
when she was 13.
Okay.
Her brother Charles died at 4 days old.
Okay. This was after the mom died and
Yeah,
gave
this was
birth,
this
and
was
then
this was this was before the mom died, but she had a whole bunch of situations. One was her sister died 4 days old. Then a couple of
okay.
years later, her brother died at 40 days old.
All
Suspicious
right.
circumstances.
Okay.
The mother then died of a sort of infection that came
Mm-hmm.
along with the pregnancy.
Right.
And the father, they thought, was the murderer of the two children who had been used for sacrifices in a black mass.
Let me tell you something. Considering the times for them to arrive at that conclusion where infant mortality was high,
Hmm.
there must have been good reason for them to suspect him.
The coroner, I have some information, about the death certificates, and it was suspicious. Apparently, when you're strangled, there are
Mm-hmm.
some definite signs that somebody, an expert, a forensic expert,
Right.
would be familiar with, and they were suspicious. Let's put it that way. That both of these children had been strangled,
So by the time she's an adult that this is happening, the only one is that's alive is her father.
and her father was in a psychiatric ward by the end, and wound up committing suicide.
Oh crap. Okay, so by the time this is happening, her dad's already been committed.
Yeah, her father was committed. She didn't know that. She had no relationship with her father. Her mother was dead, and her two brothers, brother and sister, were
Also, she never later on she didn't have contact with her father.
no, no,
Okay.
no. Matter of fact, he despised her. Yeah,
Wow.
he was an alcoholic and a wife beater, and just
This was a pretty bad background.
yeah, a demon worshiper. What can you say? He was a
Right,
Satanist.
right, right.
So,
So who brings her up? Is it some other family members or what?
actually, what she did was to elope with a an older man
Oh.
who took pity on her basically and got her out of
Mm-hmm.
the that situation.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So she made her. So here she is. Oh, sounds like on her own, basically.
yeah, on her own. But very bright. I mean, she's in
Yeah.
Radcliffe, which is not an easy school to get into. Speaking
Mm-hmm.
of getting into schools, and and the story is incredible because at the end she winds up being one of Boston's major socialites.
And this is going on afterwards or
Yeah,
behind the back?
after she's cured,
Wow.
she winds up marrying one of the young doctors that was involved, Prince's
Really?
assistant, and
So it
becomes a
does have a happy
socialite.
ending in a way.
Yeah, in a way, and her entire background was disguised by Prince. And even when I was looking at letters and notes, it was all her name was always scratched out.
Okay.
But
So
fortunately,
they
he didn't scratch it all out.
so Ron's like, wait a minute, that looks like a he, yeah, and it's really funny because even back then, the anonymity,
Yes,
they wanted to protect it. So eh, he does the exorcism and
yes. But again, it was I'm not going to say a mock exorcism. It was for
I know because of her belief
yeah,
system.
but she reacted exactly the way someone would, because the words were the words, and to a guy like Hodgson or Leona Piper, that's proof. Look at how she reacted.
Now let me ask you something. When this is going on, I'm just wondering because I know
Yes,
you mentioned that people were
yes,
murdered.
yes.
Was there
Well,
anybody?
the murders actually were the two children, and then
Okay,
in the demonic state, to wear this body down, she had an abusive relationship with a man that she wound up murdering.
okay. This was what after she got married to the first man, the
Yes,
one that she.
yes, exactly. The marriage lasted. The marriage was just to get her out of there.
Right, to get her out.
Yeah.
So did she go to trial for it, or what happened? Or she was
Well,
never.
that's part of the interesting story, because the detective, the marshal, is
Mm-hmm.
understands what happened, and actually she had murdered her brother and sister as well.
What?
Yeah, she had murdered her brother and sister as well. They died in her arms. Yeah. And
Wow.
so really at the end, here's a woman that has no knowledge of any of this, any of it. So how do you bring her to trial? And then uh,
Oh,
supposedly, and this happened, she was cured. So you have this woman that's cured, that has no memory of any of this. The evidence is tenuous,
right,
going back to the children, because most people thought it was the father.
right.
And but under hypnosis, when the demonic presence comes out, it admits, I killed them.
So in other words, she was already at that time under the influence of this demonic
Yes,
presence.
exactly. Yeah,
So this goes back into childhood as
yeah,
far as
absolutely.
okay.
And some of the retrogressive hypnosis scenes are stunning.
And this is the thing. Back then, like in Lizzie Borden, people had a hard time believing that women could be murderous. How's that? It was like, no, women can't do that, much less a girl.
But in this demonic state, she had incredible strength.
Right.
She had a kind of clairvoyance. She demonstrated speaking languages that she had
Yeah, that's
no.
one of those hallmarks that they say that they have like that little checklist of is a person possessed, and
Yes.
yeah, I understand that supernatural over the top strength and
Yep.
the knowledge, and also I've heard of knowledge of events that there's no way that they could know it.
Well, as a matter of fact, Prince had to etherize her. He called it. He would because became so violent. She had to be restrained, and he would use ether to restrain her.
And you got to be real careful with ether because you could like ether. Well, there's people that got high on ether. What am I talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah.
But yeah, it
But
was like one of those things too. But yeah, the I think that one time I was listening. I don't know if you're aware of, you've heard of him, Dr. Gallagher. He's a psychiatrist, and he
I have.
went right. He went. He speaks about when originally, as a psychiatrist, strictly science, he was asked to just basically assess people
Hmm.
for mental illness versus before they conducted an exorcism.
Yes.
And he kind of like one of the things that made a believer out of him along the way was that some of these people had information personally about him that he knew there was no way that
Yes.
this person was, it wasn't something like that you could look up that was known or they read it or somebody told
Mhm.
them.
Yeah. Well, it would take three or four people to restrain her in this state. So you have somebody that's 110 pounds maybe, with the strength of three people, and yeah, they would anesthetize her, and that was the only way they could control her in that state when it became violent. And in one of those mm, confrontations, the demonic presence says to Prince, "I will kill what you love most." And
Wow.
he had a prize horse named Garland. It was a quarter horse that was
Uh-huh.
like his. You know, I'm not a horse guy, but people that are, they have a prize horse. This is their life,
Right.
And
Uh-huh.
it wound up getting the next day. The horse wound up getting hit by a car
Wow.
and killed. That kind
And
of
he
thing.
and he must have been like,
Well,
what
a
are the
lot
odds
of
on that?
I've talked to I had a couple friends that looked at this story with me, psychiatrists, to get
Mm-hmm.
their feel for it, and a couple of them told me they've dealt with situations like this, and they just don't do it. It's too dangerous. They just don't do it.
Right.
Yeah, they just don't want to get involved. It's just too weird and too
Yeah.
scary
Oh,
and too
there was
dangerous.
well, right. And this is, I mean, besides the fact that you're looking at somebody doing something, there was once, was it Gallagher? I can't remember who was describing where there was a person that was brought to him or for assessment. And this person apparently had been involved, was either a Satanist or been involved for a long time in occult activity. All
Yes.
right. But they decided, let's go the route of therapy against, all these
Mhm.
psychiatrists are
Sure.
always looking at it strictly from, this is a person with mental illness or undiagnosed mental illness, whatever. So they get two other doctors to basically treat this person for like 6 months on and off.
Mm.
At the end of 6 months, they say, look, we're not making headway with her.
Mhm.
So they said, we're gonna just close it out. We're not going anywhere with this. They weren't diagnosing her with possession or anything. They were just saying nothing's happening. After they withdraw from the case, they both share notes that while they were seeing her, first they each separately would start hearing weird noises in their house, okay?
Mhm.
And they were suffering, they said, from unusually bad headaches, but really bad, like out of the norm.
Yes.
They
Mhm.
never talked to each
Yes.
other while they were seeing her. This was something after the fact. Each one couldn't believe that the other basically had the exact same occurrences while they were dealing with this person. In other words, it
Well,
wasn't like I
actually,
told them and I primed this person.
right. Well, actually, Prince has his moments where he thinks he's going crazy.
Okay,
Where
why?
he
Wait,
thinks he goes, "Am I curing this woman, or is this woman making me mad?"
right.
I mean, the intensity of this, and particularly again for him, I mean, his career, his legacy is sort of on the line. This was his deal,
Mm-hmm.
and actually, it's fascinating. But this particular story actually became a play.
Really?
Yeah, and then it became a movie twice in the 1920s.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. The very early film, there was one, and then one a little later. I don't remember the dates offhand, but
Are we talking then silent films?
silent films first, and then not a silent film second. But it was a
Okay.
play. Actually, it was a play on Broadway, and I think it was something like The Case of Becky. I think it was called. They disguised names and all like that, and
Oh, of course.
fictionalized it. Yeah,
Of
they
course.
fictionalized it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's just a hell of a story, and the thing that I find most fascinating is that you have. So let's assume for a minute that literally you have a demonic presence from hell talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
I have the transcript of
Okay.
what that demonic presence says, and it's stunning. It just drips evil.
Right.
It just drips evil.
It I don't know. This is a book that Father Malachi Martin wrote in, was it the 70s?
Mm-hmm.
And he, in it same thing. He disguises the names, but he gave 5 stories of possessions and
Mm-hmm.
exorcisms. And some of them he'll say, I either knew the person firsthand or I received the information from another person. But he made a pretty. I mean, you can tell the way he wrote it was interesting in some of the parts, but some of the conversations that you're hearing, you're like, what? Like you said, the content, the meaning is like,
Yes.
that's so barren. That's like,
Yes.
that's
Stark.
evil, like you said. This is
Just
not like, oh,
stark.
I want to kill you. It's like very God.
And it's very intense and very um it's intense. I guess it must be a stronger word than intense, but that's it. Sullen,
Right.
deadly. You know, uh,
And this was one of the things that he was saying, because he left. Well, no, he didn't leave the church. He left the. Well, he didn't leave the priesthood. They let him go off of two. The only thing I think he was the only vow that he broke, that no, he didn't break, that he kept, was chastity. But the other ones, he says he had to do that to make a living.
mm-hmm.
But he kept on working in exorcism, and I heard him on interview say, one of the things is when you're in the presence of something that absolutely hates you.
That's right. No, that's such a good line and so true. I thought there was a wonderful line that from Charles Baudelaire, the poet from the 18 French poet from the 1850s. He said the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people he did not exist.
Yes, and this is because, again, we come into, when there was this thing with the science, it was like poo-pooed, like, oh, if you don't get me wrong, there is such a thing as
Uh-huh.
superstition. I get it,
Oh,
you
sure.
know. But there was a point where you were considered stupid if you believed in the devil, or if you that are you
But
superstitious?
this is what there's a debate that goes on, and here's a line from Hodgson. This is
Right,
the spirit. This is the head of the Psychical Research
right,
Society. Right. Here's what he says to Prince, and Prince, of course, is this is a condition. This is a scientific, et cetera, et cetera. He says, "Don't you see, Morton? Can you not bring yourself to understand the great mystery we stand on the threshold of solving? I beg you, consider at least the possibility that here at last, in the city of Boston, 1898, is tangible evidence of transcendence. If there are demons, there must be angels, and probably a God and life everlasting. You ask, where are the doctors and clinicians? Dr. Prince, we are the doctors. We are the clinicians." Isn't that a wonderful line?
yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
and
this
it's
was,
true.
but it was like either you were either in one camp or the other.
Yes, but this is what William James says to Prince, who was a great philosopher, by the way, as well as a scientist. He says, "You believe in God. You're a Christian, correct?" He goes, "Yes." He goes, "Isn't God, aren't angels, aren't they non-corporal intelligences? If you believe that there are angels, if you believe there's a God, why wouldn't there be a devil?" And at the end, it's a question of this: do you believe that there's a soul? Do you
Right,
believe that there's a spiritual existence? If you say yes, well, by definition, you're sort of saying, yeah, sure, there must be angels and devils, and there
right,
must be non-corporal intelligences. And now, if you
exactly.
want to say you're an atheist and
Right,
don't
which
believe in
is
God, and well, fine. Now you have an argument. You can put a stake in the ground and say, I don't believe any of this.
one
But
way or the other. Is
you
nothing.
can't believe in one side of it and
And
not
that's it.
believe in the other side of it.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of them ran into problems as far as, and like you said, back then, academics, they had a reputation, they had egos. Um, and you didn't want to be known as the guy, because if you got back then, if you got a reputation, it would follow you around
It's not just back
forever.
then. Look at John Mack with the alien abduction.
Yes.
Here's a guy that's heads up the psychiatric department, psychology department at Harvard University. Tenured, been there, written books, considered one of their primary scholars. He writes a book that says he believes that alien abduction is a real thing. They want to drop him from trying to drive him out of Harvard University.
It was like, what? You're what?
Yeah.
You
So I mean, so
right,
if you think that
exactly.
that academic scientific bias still doesn't exist, it
It
exists.
does. Yes, it
But
does.
probably back then, these founders of psychiatry were battling for respectability. It was a new science.
Yes.
They were
Right, psychic
battling against
research.
spiritualists.
How can I say? I think they were trying to do the psychic research from a scientific point of view. Problem with psychic stuff is, the basis for, how can I say, scientific is that you can model it and duplicate it, replicate it in
Yeah.
laboratory
Hmm.
circumstances. But the psychic or supernatural, that you can't do that. It's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
know, you can't just go and say, you know what, you do this first and then you do this under these circumstances or this environment, and this will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. And I think that because it couldn't be duplicated under what laboratory, whatever, a lot of the psychic research that was done was dismissed as, you know, fraud.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and don't get me wrong, I think especially with that age of the spiritualism, there was frauds. But this is what
Oh,
I think.
certainly there was fraud. Yeah.
This is what I personally think. I think that there were people that were psychic, all right? But again, psychic ability is not an on-demand thing. And
Hmm.
but when the psychic ability is paying the roof over your head and the bread at your table, you better be psychic 24/7.
Yeah. Exactly.
When you got paying customers, you become psychic even when you're not, even when there's days, because that I think that psychic ability comes and goes, or there's days that you're real psychic, And there's days you're like, ugh.
Well, you know
But
what?
you had to pay your bills. You were
Yes,
psychic all the time, and then that's when I think people turn to like some of the fraud stuff.
yes, yes. You know, you had asked about why Clara Fowler, why this person would be possessed and not that
Yes.
person. I have some of the transcript. Would you like me to read some of
Yes,
it? So
absolutely.
this is from
Yes.
the so-called demon's point of view. And let me just make sure I have this right.
And
Yeah,
let me
here.
ask you something. Was it only one demon that supposedly was possessing her?
There were moments when a prince would walk in a room and she was alternating between states, where
Okay.
basically she'd be Clara and it would be going back and forth. She'd be saying help, help, and the demon
Mm-hmm.
would be saying, I control this body, and be going
Okay.
back and forth. And occasionally there'd be multiple voices that could be heard.
Okay. See, that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking
But
about. Yeah.
basically it was a particular demonic presence. Yeah.
Okay. Go
So
ahead. Go ahead.
here's, again, bear with me if you need to edit. I
No,
apologize.
don't worry about it. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, so this is the marshal confronting
Okay.
Clara Fowler in the state. So it was you who murdered the Fowler babies. Babies. It was Clara Fowler's body, but you who did the killing. Answer. It was me. It is me. It will always be me. Yes, I strangled the Fowler fucklets, squalid little things, wrung their necks, and took them apart piece by piece like a doll's part. Forrest, too, carved him up, watched him endure excruciating pain. But credit where credit is due. I couldn't have done it without Clara. So then he goes, Borden and Coriaro. Lizzie Borden, Coriaro was the other guy. The others
Mm.
too. Yes, we've met before, Marshall, at the Borden house. I was Lizzie, timid and shy, a school teacher. We split her mother's skull open with a poleaxe. Anyway, I won't go into too much. Was it 17 or 18 whacks? I don't remember. Uh, and let's not forget Coriaro, pleasant man, loved dogs, so I became one. Next, he knew he was mounted on old Bertha's chest. Shall I go on? Would you like me to describe the Ripper's modus operandi? And basically, there's a great scene where he says, like, these are celebrations. To take a saintly person, and
Yes.
these are, we celebrate. And maybe we do thousands. Maybe there's a Hitler, maybe there, and this is
Right.
a
Right. Yeah. That's low hanging fruit. We want
this
the.
is a wonderful thing. But when we can get one like this,
Uh huh.
this to us is a treasure.
Yes. Yeah.
And
It's
so it's
corruption.
it's
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 corruption.
incredibly spooky. But
Hmm.
basically, the idea, and this really goes along with my own experience, to tell you the truth, is basically there are good people and bad people,
Hmm.
but occasionally there are people like maybe Jesse James Martin
Hmm.
or a couple others that I've met who really just sacrifice their humanity. They go in both feet, and literally they don't. And maybe Lizzie Borden, maybe Coriaro, maybe whoever. Where at the end they go in both feet and they become living, tangible, walking, talking evil.
Yes. I think
I
so.
believe
I
that.
think. I think that
By the way,
trauma does open them up to that.
I truly believe that.
And I mean, I know, like, for example, Lizzie Borden, she had the trauma. She lost her mom. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Um, some people, they say, well, children sometimes, I mean, that's very traumatic for a child, whichever way, even if the other parent
Yes.
was there,
Yes.
And we really don't know what went on behind the
Yes.
scenes with
Yes.
her. Because back then it was like,
What
plus,
was
they were a respectable family. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. But what's interesting is that they have no memory of doing it.
Right.
And that's what I find, interesting. It's
Do you
almost
think
like
her sister knew that she had done it?
I think that a lot of people knew she did it. Certainly, this Marshall knew that she did it. There was evidence that couldn't be presented in court. I don't know exactly what it was, but that's been referred to more than once by this particular Marshall.
So,
Hilliard.
right. In other words, it was just, we know it, but that's as far as this is going to go. I mean, as far as we
Yes.
cannot do anything else with it.
Well, I mean, that happens quite often, where evidence is circumstantial. There's really no, I mean, with her, what is the alternative? I mean, they found the
No.
axe. You know, I mean, there weren't too many other ways to look at it except maybe some transient had done it. But
No, I
you
know they
know,
tried to. They came up with a lot of different theories of
yeah,
people that had maybe something against her dad, her father. Was it
yes, yeah. But
you,
but but I mean, and maybe Lizzie Borden isn't the best example of this. As I mentioned, this sort of predatory evil. Jack the Ripper is a good example of predatory evil. Jack the Ripper,
do you think that I was one man? Because you always hear, was it more than one person killing
I
these
think
women?
for six of the murders or so, the five or six that happened initially, yeah, and then I think afterwards there were three or so that were
That were copycats?
yeah questionable whether he actually
Mm-hmm.
did it. But there's a great quote from Jack the Ripper. One day men will look back and say, "I gave birth to the 20th century."
Yes,
I
I
mean, what
believe
an
it.
incredible line that is. But yeah,
Yes.
H. Holmes, the first serial killer in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, very similar. I mean, this is a guy who in Chicago had a murder house. He had surgical tables set up in his basement. He had,
No, it was incredible what he got away with. I'm telling you, when he
yeah,
constructed that murder thing, and he
yeah,
had like gas chambers,
yes,
and where he would like
exactly.
kill.
Yeah, he would torture people to death. Literally, they'd go into a fireproof chamber, and
Yes.
uh, and they'd be incinerated. He'd be watching through a peephole. You know, and this is evil. This isn't happenstance. It's not somebody catches his wife or vice versa, husband in bed with somebody and kills them. That's a kind of murder, but this is evil, and
Yes.
that's
Yes.
what this is about.
Right. This is why I tell everybody. You hear about people that murder one another, and sometimes it's revenge, money, or
Yeah,
love.
yeah,
In other words, there's a personal, want to call it passionate, or
yes,
there's you got something against that person, whatever it is. They owe
yes,
you money. They stole your wife or your husband,
yes,
or they took your job, or they fired you. But
yeah,
this thing where you have nothing against this person, as a matter of fact, you might not even know who they are,
yeah.
but you're still willing to kill them for the sake of killing them because that feeds your soul somehow.
Feed your
That is
soul. Feed your
that
soul is really a
and that to me, I think that's where the evil part comes in, because you can't
yeah.
even say, you know what, because of this person, my life got ruined because they did fill in the blank, whatever.
Well, actually, there was a headline about H. Holmes called him a fiend in human disguise.
Yes. Do you know that he had a gentleman that was a helper, and after Holmes left, he he was like a not, I want to say a janitor, but he would help him out. And the police came and spoke to him, and he's like acting like all stupid, like I don't know anything. I was just
Mm-hmm.
here to help him. Him and his wife lived in the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
The police can never really prove that he participated in helping him or that
Yeah.
he didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, he moved away, and that was one of those things back then, that stuff like that. He ended up committing suicide, by the way, even
Who's that?
after Holmes had gotten killed.
Oh, I see. And Holmes
He,
was buried under 10 feet of cement.
yeah,
Did you know?
they opened it up just to make sure he was there, and he wasn't.
Yeah, 10 feet of cement. Yeah.
And but you know what? He was the one that asked for that, which people don't realize. He didn't want grave robbery, or the thing of where they're gonna dig me up,
Mm.
and do
No, no.
something to
The,
me.
the the authorities wanted, but there's another interesting story about him, and take this for what it's worth. But again, this is documented. He was in prison and awaiting hanging.
Right.
And so, he'd done atrocious things. I mean, we don't even have to get into the atrocious things that he did. And
Right.
again, he would be one of my prime examples of evil as a predatory physical presence. Um, but they buried him under 10 feet of cement to keep him there, to keep his soul there. But according to a priest, according to the prison guards and the executioners, he physically changed over that period of time. Physically, he
Really?
looked like they could not identify the man they hung. That's what they said.
I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, that's a fact.
That's and
Weird.
what's really funny? I have heard, that people, and this isn't, we're not talking here possession, even though you could say, well, this really is possession, but people that that suffer from
Remolded.
that multiple personality disorder,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
that I've heard that some of them will it's not only the personality that changes, but they'll even get a different eye color, which I'm thinking, how's that
That's correct.
working?
No, that's correct.
And that they'll even develop symptoms, like physical symptoms, like diabetes, things from
Well,
that
yeah, there's a
personality.
case of Anna X, and I think it was documented by Sigmund Freud, where this woman had been abused and by
Okay,
a particular person, and she couldn't accept that,
right.
the rape or whatever as a child, etc., and wound up becoming her attacker. She developed her breast went away. She developed a
Oh,
strong upper torso. Her face remolded to look like the
what?
person that had been assailing her for years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's the case of Anna X, Sigmund Freud.
I
So
gotta look. And you hear about body dysmorphia, but that's just like in your mind. You know what I'm saying? When you hear
yes,
people that they'll look in the mirror and they don't really see what's the mirror, see what.
yes, yes,
But that's totally different when this person and then you ask
transformed.
yourself, are our minds that powerful that we can alter ourselves, or are we talking a supernatural
Yeah, I mean,
situation?
there's some very strange cases. I mean, of course, there's the ones where and William James studied one, and I can't think of her name, but anyway, um, she had a similar situation where she adopted the mannerisms
Hmm.
and the physical presence and the physique and facial features of someone that had died in a mental institution 15 years before and called herself that name.
Well, there's a book. I don't know if you've. It's called 30 Years Among the Dead, and it was written by a doctor. He was a doctor of psychiatry. He was Swedish, but he came and he studied and practiced in Chicago. Then moved to Dr. Wickland,
Mm-hmm.
and his wife was she acted as a medium, and he was talking about spirit attachments. This is not demonic. These are not non-human entities. Where he even described at some point where because he was a psychiatrist and he was involved with psychiatric patients, where he says that he would have people that out of the blue they became suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And he found in some instances, once his wife worked with him, that they had attachments of suicidal people that for some reason never realized that they had been successful in killing themselves. So they kept trying to reenact the suicide, but through this person who the family themselves were like, why is this person all of a sudden become suicidal? And it was an attachment of a suicidal person that they were trying to redo the
Yes,
suicide attempt.
I
It
see.
was really interesting when he talks about all these different attachments and how people sometimes act so totally different out of the blue, or
Absolutely
they develop
strange, right?
symptomology, things like that.
Absolutely strange. But again, I mean, the idea is, and I find this fascinating. I'd written a book about alien abduction and UFOs, a true story of case
Hmm.
history, and as much evidence as you see, and you have fighter pilots now, so I mean, this is
Yes,
not you or me. These are trained people, that are trained to see enemies and
right.
report things with great clarity and detail that see and videotape UFOs. I mean, they're there. You can see them. They go crazy when they see them. Wow, do you see that? Look at how the
Yeah,
speed. It's going like Mach 10. This, that, and the other. You have governors. You have presidents. You have military. Tons of military people now. That say that UFOs have shown up over nuclear missile sites, and the missiles
exactly.
have gone dead. I mean, these are incredibly. One of them was one of the key trainers for Top Gun pilots just a couple of years ago, and then you'll have people that look at what has to be at least considered um, more than believable, and
Hmm.
they say, "Oh, this is all nonsense. This is all like hysteria. It's lights in the sky. There's no real evidence." I mean, you really have to wonder. I mean, what do these beings have to do? Come with a club and hit you over the head and say, "Here I am."
You know what? And that's for the people that actually say something, because maybe until recently, if you were a policeman or a pilot or whoever, this was like a career killer.
And it was, and a lot of careers
If
were
you
killed.
started talking about what you saw,
Yeah,
you might have mentioned it, And that was the end of it because you never want to be known as that guy because,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
But I mean, again, you're talking about some of these. He said Fife Symington, the governor, former governor of Arizona. You know, I mean, this is a guy that was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. He's a private pilot, you know, has planes and keeps up with that sort of thing.
right,
He says, you know, I saw a UFO that was bigger than a an aircraft carrier, along with 1,000 other people. You know, float over my head
right.
at an incredibly slow speed, and then take off at you know something that I've never seen a fighter jet, you know, in terms of speed. That's kind of credible, you know.
So, and then you also get, that school is like, yeah, they're unidentified, but their origin is not extraterrestrial. Is this something that are these crafts that we've made and,
Yes.
you know, we don't know
Well,
anything about it. And when we see them, we're like, wow, what is that?
well, I mean, you show me an aircraft carrier that can float and go
Not,
at Mach 4, and you've convinced me.
it's like one of those things that the only part I don't get is, we've had like what in the last couple of years, these congressional meetings. And that's
Yes,
part
yes,
I don't get is for decades, you guys were telling everybody that actually spoke up, you're crazy, shut up,
yeah.
you're a crackpot. And now they're having a hearing and it's like, what changed? Like,
Well, you know,
I don't
Mark
know.
Rubio, the senator, had an
Uh,
interesting thing, and I guess he, you know, he's one of the people that wants more investigation. He said when you have like the head of Top Gun training say
right.
that he tracked a you know a UFO, watched it go underwater, come up, leave it Mach 5 or whatever it was, you know, something no human could survive in terms of speed and agility. Either we have crazy people running our military, or this is really happening, and I prefer to think it's really happening.
Well, no, and this is the thing though, that even through all these decades, maybe if you want to go back as far back as Roswell, let's not go into Ancient Aliens. Let's go back to 47 to Roswell.
Yes.
After that, you have had pilots and, and trained observers and people that, let's say, are credible.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right.
Absolutely.
And they were still like poo-pooed. And from what I understand, the Mac Brazel, which is the one that supposedly found the debris out there in
Yes.
Roswell,
Yes.
even towards the end of all his life, he was like, the biggest mistake he said he ever made was coming forward with
Yes.
whatever he brought in.
Sure.
It was like, what a big mistake I made. It, like, in other words, there was a lot of suppression of, we don't want, this is a weather balloon, that kind of deal.
Yes. Yes.
And it's like, wait a minute, the truth is there's been a lot of credible people that have been saying, I saw something. I don't know what it was, but I saw something out there.
Yes. Well, I mean, at least the conclusions I came after studying this case for, I mean, arguably 50 years,
Right.
arguably, but let's say intensely for 5, where I hired detectives to dig up
Okay.
information, you know, that I didn't have the skills to find. I came to 2 conclusions. One is that evil is real. There
Okay.
is a such thing as a devil, if that's what you want to call it, but an evil presence that exists in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and 2, that there is an immortal soul and there is a spiritual world, and we are part of it, and whether we know that or not.
Let me ask you, let's go down the rabbit hole. And I'm sure you might have heard this, that demons are extraterrestrials or that they're inter or intradimensional beings.
Yes, I'm sure I've heard that. Yes. Um, you know, this is what I think. I think when you come right down to it, I mean, look at even Newtonian physics. So, I mean, basically, the premise of most physics that we know is you throw an apple in the air and it will come down again.
Right.
But now you have quantum physics,
Yes.
and maybe that's not exactly true. You know, the basic premise of everything, what's solid and what isn't, what makes up the world. I
Right.
think we know almost zero about our own existence. I don't think
Right.
we know almost anything that you can say as a fact. We have perceptions and we have accepted perceptions. But at the end of the day, I don't think we know a damn thing about human
Oh,
existence.
right, right. Which is when you start saying, okay, no, they didn't come from another, and this is just me, planet, as in light years away. Maybe what they're doing is they're coming through a inter or intradimensional portal.
Sure.
Not the spaceship as in linear. You know, they're coming. I mean, we always
Absolutely.
like, okay, so why not?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you think about it, I mean, just go back, you know, 50, 60 years. Who thought you could reattach limbs?
Oh,
Who thought that you'd have a little iPhone in your pocket that you could
you
watch a
know what?
sporting
For
event
those
and
of us who've been around long enough to know what life was before any of this,
yes, yeah,
in other words, we've seen the progression.
exactly.
Um, yeah, yeah,
I
and
mean, actually, it was Fife Symington who said, in his opinion, what he saw, and I'm talking about this UFO, what he saw would be the equivalent of taking Christopher Columbus and putting him in the cockpit of a 757 and having it take off and go to Europe. He said that's how far behind we are looking at the technology that he saw.
so the next question is, Ron, are we going to get the short end of that stick when we finally meet? Like Stephen Hawking was saying, usually
Maybe this isn't such a good idea.
yeah, it's like, right. What is it that old what is it that Twilight Zone to serve mankind kind of
Yes.
ending?
Yeah. Well,
You know,
who doesn't remember that one, huh?
I mean that's like that was great. And how
Yeah.
is what back in the 60s when he came out to serve
Yeah.
mankind? All of a
Yeah.
sudden we get the joke. Yeah, I was like, what? We're the guy getting on the ship.
Well, this is my own opinion, and again, this is a big umbrella thing. But my big
Right,
umbrella statement would be: if there wasn't grace in the world,
right,
we'd be eating each other on the streets.
sure,
But there is, and so there are violence that goes on and violence that bursts through the web. But at the end of it, um, most people live a civilized life. Most people try to do the
hmm
best they can.
sure,
And at the end, I think the only thing that holds that together is a superior being that blesses us
absolutely,
with blesses
absolutely.
us
I
with
think so.
blesses us with uh, a sense of goodness.
A moral compass,
Yes.
a moral compass. That's something that how can I tell you? When how's this? When nobody's watching, you don't either have to fear punishment or you're not looking for recognition or reward. When you do the right thing,
Yes.
because your moral compass tells you this is the right thing to do, not because
Absolutely.
you're afraid I'm going to get in trouble. You
Yeah.
know, I think the majority, yes, there's psychopaths. I know that, and I know about the dark triad, and there's a few people running around like that. But I think overall, I'm a big believer in humanity. By the way,
Yeah.
I'm a
I
humanist.
agree. I agree.
you know we all have this moral compass. This is regardless of that we're born with as humans. I think I believe humans are good. I know there's a lot of people that, depending on
No,
your
I
life
agree. I agree with you.
experiences, but I think most human beings, unless you're treated very very badly as a
Hmm.
child, we grow up with pretty good knowing what's right and wrong. you
Yes.
know and I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that is our best hope for the future.
Yes.
And not pinning our, well, that's another thing about, did you get, you always get that version that think that the ETs are going to come and save the day. It's like, we got to stop doing that. We
Yeah.
got to be
Yeah.
responsible for the earthlings.
Yeah. No, I think there is an element of free will.
Yeah, of
And
course.
and as I mentioned again, if you take my premise about good and evil, I think that a certain number of people, whether it's a Jack the Ripper or whomever, step over a line and literally become evil. But the
Right.
same holds true for others. There are others that step over a different line and become kind of saints.
Yeah. Well, but you get also what they call perfect possession.
Yes.
These are the people that don't have to be taken over. How's that? They
Yes.
don't fight
No,
it.
no, exactly. I think it's a rarity. When
Yeah.
you talk about the Ted Bundys this is
Yeah.
a rarity. And like I said, if the devil celebrates anything, he must celebrate those things,
All right.
especially.
There's
Yeah.
people that, yeah, absolutely. There's people out there that are like that.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't have to take me over. Don't worry. What do you need? Oh, you need me to, okay, but what are you going to do for me? There's people like that running around all over the
Sure.
place.
Sure.
But I think that those are the exception versus the
I
rule.
agree. I agree.
And let me ask you, what you this book, have you completed the book yet? Have you published it?
Yeah, the book is called The Unwelcome. It's called The Chilling
Okay.
Story of Demonic Possession, The Unwelcome. It'll come out in May. The
Okay.
book is
All
finished.
right.
The book is finished, and it'll be out in May. And right at the moment, we're just waiting for the cover designs to come in, and it'll be published by Black Rose Publishing.
Okay. So this is let me tell you something. I'd never heard of any of this,
Mm.
you know.
It's,
And
I
I think
mean,
it's
Bill
fascinating.
Blatty gave me a gift.
He did. You know what? And I'm telling you, I think of all the movies. I remember, I snuck off to see The Exorcist
Yeah.
behind my mom's back
Yeah.
because I was 13 years old. I went with my uncle. She had like a younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, it was making all the headlines. And
Sure
my mom
was.
told me, "You're not." And I lied to her. And I told her I was going to go see The Day of the Dolphin. Well, guess what happened?
That's not even close, Marlene.
This was around the same time. These were the releases. This is the, of course she didn't care. Guess what? I remember, I think I saw the first 20 minutes of the movie and the rest of the time. It was really funny because I remember that they had a line going into the theater and then they would let people out on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I see a bunch of guys coming out the other side laughing. I'm thinking, it can't be that bad. They're laughing.
Yeah.
Little did I know that men laugh a lot of times when they're nervous.
So there you go. Right.
And I was thinking, we're standing in the line to get the tickets, so it's like 20 minutes into the movie. The rest of the movie, I was looking at the theater floor, and then when I got home and my uncle had to walk me to the door, I went and I slept in my mom's bed, and I was all over, and she's like, "What's wrong with you?"
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
eventually
think
I
there's
had to tell her the truth the next day that I went off and I saw the movie
so you
behind her
finally
back.
confessed, huh?
I had to. I was driving her crazy.
No, I
Well,
think there's something very disturbing about, again, about the tangibility
yes,
of evil. It's one thing to talk about, oh, this is a bad person, this guy's a bad guy, but it's another to just, as you had said, to come face to face with something that just hates you for what you are.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, just for the sake of hating you, whether
Yeah.
it's because you're human or
Mhm.
whatever. Not like the I hate you. We're talking here about hate, like
Yes.
really,
Yes.
I hate you. Like and that's not only that I want to kill you, I want to kill you and make you suffer while I'm doing it,
Yeah.
kind of
Hmm.
deal.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's true. You're absolutely right. The Catholic Church does I mean, they have problems getting priests, but exorcists, let me tell you something. Whatever few priests they got coming through the seminaries, they try to tap them to become exorcists, and they're like, no,
Well, like I said, I mean,
no.
a couple of psychiatrists and that I've dealt with in uh, running ideas by them and whatnot, they wanted nothing to do with it. And
Oh, let me tell you
a
something.
couple had experiences with that kind of thing, and it just scared the hell out of them. I
Well,
mean, they felt they were in physical danger, and maybe spiritual
yes,
danger.
the I mean, I've been doing psychic investigations since the 1990s, and about a few years ago, I didn't do that many, but I went to do one because they asked me because the man, he had gone to his local church, which by the way, he was a constant, a Catholic.
Hmm.
And basically he got poo-pooed. Not poo-pooed. The priest that was there came and did a blessing on the house. But he's trying to explain to him, look, this is and he told me, he later on he tells me, he says, I thought that if I pushed it, I was gonna be isolated from because he would go to church every Sunday. This was his parish, and he had been living at this house for 30 years. Come
Hmm.
to find out, him and his wife that had passed away for many years had worked as psychiatric nurses in the prison.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And there was a lot of, I hate to say it, there was a lot of people there that had demonic possessions and attachments.
Yeah,
He's,
yeah.
because we started later on talking about like when did this happen? How did this happen?
I think there's a lot more of that sort of thing than most people would realize.
Yes. And I told him, and he goes, I don't think he believed me. I said, no, that priest, whoever he was, he did believe you.
Mm.
And he goes, no, I don't think I go, he believed you. He was just scared
Yeah.
that you, a regular churchgoer, that he knew you and that you were a reasonable person and that
Yeah.
you weren't going crazy, was coming to
Uh-huh.
him with this, which
Well,
means,
well, actually, there's a thing called contagion. Maybe you've heard of that,
yes,
where
yes,
basically the exorcist or the medical doctor, whoever that gets involved in the case, actually becomes possessed themselves. And there's
yes.
a good case of that in France, in Loudun, where there was a
Mm-hmm.
convent where these possessions had happened, and I know 4 priests went to stem the epidemic, and of the 4 priests, one wound up in a mental institution, and 2 committed suicide. and the other became possessed himself.
You know what? I never knew. I mean, I'm aware of that case
But
with the
that's
convent
true.
and
That's a true
I
story. Yeah.
never knew that that was what happened in the aftermath for those priests that were involved with it. I did not know that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
See that, and that's the thing. It's like, there was another. You remember that case that the devil made me do it case that it became Ed and Lorraine Warren. This was, I want to say, early 70s, and as a matter of fact, they recently made a movie about it. And in the actual story, once because one of the kids got possessed, and anyway, they go to the parish priest.
Mm.
This parish priest had been involved in an exorcism 10 years before, and he told them, he says, I cannot get into that again. I cannot do
Yeah.
that again.
I don't have the
He
strength.
was the one that in turn told them contact Ed and Lorraine Warren. In other
Yes.
words, he guided them, to contact them. They have, but I personally, I cannot.
No,
I can't do that.
and maybe we could both understand that.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's a dark alley to walk down.
Yes, it is. It is. It's very, but yes. So, what is for my podcast listeners, Ron? What is your website so that if they want to
I have
follow up?
just an easy one, ronfelber.com.
There you go.
So
That's fantastic.
RONFELBER.com.
Uh-huh.
That's simple.
So, are you going to keep? I was going to ask you. You're going to keep writing. If you're a writer, you keep writing. I think.
Oh
So.
yeah, actually, I just wrapped up this book, and I'm really happy with it. I think I think it'll do well. I think it's a movie story. I think that
Okay.
it just got a lot going on, and it's really a captivating story. But also, aside from just the idea of demonic possession, it's almost like a detective novel because of these murders that are
Sure.
involved, and this Hilliard, the marshal, who's obsessed with finding the killer of these two children. And
Exactly.
so I know I was,
Exactly.
like I said, I didn't know how good a story this was
Until you
until
started going
I
through and you
really
started doing the
started
research.
unraveling things, and
Right.
finding names and making connections, and finding articles and things of that nature in the newspapers. But like I said, Jack the Ripper is involved. H. Holmes is involved. It's an incredible story.
Right. And H. Holmes, let me tell you something. He was basically using that World's Fair as
Yes,
a hunting ground.
yes, he was.
You know what? One of the things I want to mention is, and he met a lot of these women that he victimized through personals. We talk of modern days about these dating sites. Back then they would put these little personals, and these women were coming across the country basically without really knowing who they were meeting with and
Yes.
how there's for lack of they were so gullible or innocent or
Yes.
stupid.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But this is the thing. This is what amazes me. And this is really, I mean, I'm sure that had I not had my 3 years or so transporting these prisoners, these federal prisoners and whatnot, I wouldn't have the point of view that I do. And so it's remarkable to me how naive people really are about what goes on.
Yes,
That there really, really are bad people, and
right,
that you could stumble onto someone that seems like the nicest woman or the nicest guy in the world, and that's just a facade, like
right. Some of them
H.
are
Holmes,
quite
that just
quite
lures you
charismatic.
into something awful. And
He was from what and he was a real good con man though. He was
yes,
really good at and it was really interesting also that he got different people to do different parts of that castle because nobody really knew what he was constructing.
yeah,
He would
yeah.
hire
Hmm.
some people and then
Hmm.
not pay them and then hire some other ones but nobody really understood
Yeah, talk about
what they were.
premeditated.
Oh, absolutely. That
Yeah, yeah,
guy.
yes.
Yeah. Again,
So
it has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you, Ron. Wow.
yeah, it was fun. And
Let me ask you.
maybe you'll have me back again when we come a
Yes.
little bit closer to the book coming out.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Let me ask you just out of curiosity.
Yeah, sure.
When you're writing these books, have you ever had any weird experiences in your own life?
I had a ghost story. Do you want to hear it real quick?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I had written a book about a congressman and J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, and it was a story that wasn't very flattering to the FBI.
Okay.
So I got a call from Bill Bonanno, the head of the Bonanno crime family, and he loved the
Okay.
book and wanted to make a movie out of it. So we got to be very good friends, and he actually gave me a story too, and it wound up being a TV show called The Mob Doctor, based on a book
Okay.
that I'd written, which and he had introduced me to John Gotti's physician and to Carlo Gambino's physician, and so I
Okay.
wrote a book about that physician. So anyway, long story short, I was in France on business at a castle, believe it or not, at a big meeting for business, and he passed away. And like I said, we were close. So I felt bad that I couldn't go to the funeral or anything because I was just stuck um, for a week or so. But anyway, I came back and I did visit the widow. I went with a friend and I visited his wife. I had
Okay.
given him for his 50th anniversary a painting of the astronauts in a Wall Street ticker tape parade. What great
Okay.
painting! And so his wife goes to me, this is our family room, and you'll notice all family portraits and things of that nature. The only thing that isn't from our family is your picture because Bill thought so much of you that he hung it, in this room. No
Okay.
sooner does she say that than it falls off the wall.
Oh,
Just falls off the
come
wall.
on. It's like,
So,
what are the odds of that?
so I was like embarrassed, and I go, I try to put it back up, and it doesn't cross your mind how weird that is, right?
Of
But
course.
then I leave, and I said, "Oh, that's very strange," because she was in Tucson, Arizona. I was in France. I mean, the odds of
Uh-huh.
that moment, that happening, is
Exactly.
minimal. So then I go home. About a week later, I'm asleep. Actually, my wife is here, and my daughter was in the next room, and I feel the cushion of the bed go down, and I say, "Oh, it's my daughter. She's having a bad dream or something," and you know, comes into the room, sits, and wants to tell me she had a bad dream. But I look up, and it's Bill Banana, and I could tell you what he was wearing. I
Okay.
could tell you the aftershave that he had. I could tell you everything about him. That's how specific this was. So I said, I said, Bill. He goes, I said, what are you doing here? He said, I wanted to just tell you everything's all right. You know. I said, well, how are you doing? He goes, I said, you're dead, right? He goes, I'm stuck. And this is a word I would never use. I would never use a word like I'm stuck.
Right.
He goes, I'm stuck. I have to think about everything I did in my life, little and small. And it's not good or bad. Nobody says it's good or bad. I just have to think about it. And so I can't, I can't move. I can't go on. And I said, all right. I said, well, it's great seeing you. And he's talked about family. We had a long conversation about my kids, about this and that. And very, it was delightful to see him and a delightful
Uh-huh. And
conversation.
and
Then I said, you can come back anytime because I missed him. And I said, this would be great. I mean, I guess he can come see me. I know it sounds weird,
right, right.
but then I thought about Bill Badano, and I knew that he had killed people or ordered people
Right. That's
killed.
what
And
he
I
was
knew
thinking
that,
a lot about.
yeah. And I thought about my daughter in the next room. And so he gets up and is leaving. And I said, Bill, you're always welcome, but on one condition. It's got to be all right. Do you know what I'm saying? It's got to be all right. And he just sort of shrugged, snickered at me, and walked away. I never saw him again. Disappeared.
Think about that. He had probably had a lot of stuff. Think about when you say think about the what that's a lot of thinking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
That's my
those are
ghost
the
story.
things that you might have known and what you didn't know that might,
Yeah.
he was directly or indirectly involved in.
Well,
Stuff like that.
one time I was out to dinner and I had my two sons with me. And so we were in Arizona to see my parents, actually. So we wound up having dinner with Bill. And so my one son is like 8. And so we're having coffee. And he goes, did you ever kill somebody? He goes, I said, yes. Greg,
And you're like, oh, geez.
that's an impolite question. So he goes, no, no, no. I want to answer it. He looked at him. He said, I never killed anybody that didn't deserve it.
It's like, all right. Okay.
And you know what
And
my
it,
son said? He looks at me and goes, that means he killed somebody.
it's like, kids. I was like, that was, oh. And how
That
old was
means
your
he
son?
killed somebody.
How old was your kid?
Well, now they're grown, but at the time one was 12 and one was 8.
That's it. That's what I
Yeah.
see. That's the perfect, and that's what you gotta love about kids.
Yeah. But
It's
then we
like
met
okay,
his father, Joseph Bonanno. I think I was the last person to interview Joseph Bonanno. Was one of the founders of the American Mafia, and so there was a little line, and he's sitting there, old man, 90 or so, and sort of grizzled. And there's a little line, so everybody shakes his hand, hugs him, and this and that. So my young son, the 8-year-old, then my 12-year-old, then me. So my 8-year-old walks up to Joseph Bonanno, who goes like this. So Greg turns around to my son and me. He goes, "What does he want me to do?" My other son says, "He wants you to kiss him, stupid." And and, and, and Greg turns around and looks at me and he goes, "Where?"
oh my God. I'm telling you, it's like, oh, but see, it's true, Children they're like kids is like, what is this with a kissing thing?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
My husband, he grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey.
oh yeah, sure. I
And you,
fought Golden Gloves in Elizabeth, New Jersey.
okay, I grew up in he came over down to Florida
Mhm.
in 2000, but he would always, he says back home, and I'm like, no, wait, a minute. To him, it's still home is like up there. But yeah, yeah. Even though it's changed a lot, we visited about 5 or 6 years ago, and it
Uh-huh.
had changed. He was like, man, this changed a lot.
Oh, I'm sure it has. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to
Oh,
school in Newark. I went to school in St. Benedict's Prep in the Central Ward of Newark.
yeah. He went to. I can't remember. It was one of. It was a Polish, a Catholic name school, Saint whatever. He went up there, and he drove the Polish sons crazy.
Uh-huh. We drove the
So
monks crazy. So,
yeah, they stuff like that. But yeah, he says, when he came back, like he says, man, it's a lot of the neighborhoods and the people that he
oh,
grew up
totally
with,
different. Yeah,
everybody was gone,
sure.
you know. So he was kind of disappointed in a way and stuff like that. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's the way it always is. Those moments in time, they're there, then
that's right.
hey, you move on and things change.
Yeah,
Again, Ron, it has been absolutely wonderful to
yeah, it
talk
was
to you.
fun. It
I,
was
I
great
will
fun.
be getting in touch with you so that we could, so that when your book is coming out, you can come back, you
Good.
know.
That'd be wonderful. And this interview, does this go on YouTube, or can it go on YouTube or anything
Oh,
like that? Or
yes, I will send you the links to everything, and there's going to be a podcast version. I will send you the links to everything. It goes all over the place.
oh, that's
I
great. That's
I
great.
put it out on all that
Could
different,
you
not just YouTube,
possibly
but a
put it
lot of
on?
different video
Could
platforms.
you possibly put it on my website or on my Facebook page, my Facebook author page?
How's this? I can send you the embed link. I don't know what platform you have on your website. You can
Actually, I
use
was
it.
thinking about Facebook.
I can send you you can do for example, you could use the YouTube link and put it in your Facebook and it'll pop up.
The
You
YouTube
can do
link would
that.
be great. No,
Yes,
that would be great.
I can do that. Of course, absolutely. I'll send you both. I'll send you the video version and the podcast version, both.
Sounds great.
Okay?
Thanks so
Till the
much,
next time.
Marlene.
Take care. Bye-bye.
It was fun. Thank you.
Take care. Wow. And talk about, see, and yeah, see, there once upon a time when there was no self-publishing, you have to have the chutzpah to do what he did. I think that's funny. When he goes to William Peter Blatty's office, and there's just a mountain of you're thinking, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna take my manuscript and I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna give him my best speech, like please. And here, his secretary. At least the secretary though give him the message, which is nice considering. But yeah, this was the time, folks. Like once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, where just like music, these musicians where they would go to radio stations and try to get them to play their music, and hopefully it would take off. In other words, this was usually when you were nobody, you didn't have an agent, nobody to go and market your work. You had to have, and with manuscripts, it better be good from the get-go because all these different uh, publishing houses that they had the people that, they would get so many manuscripts. And this was the only way that you were, because remember, back then, there wasn't that print on demand that we have now. So, in other words, even if for some reason you decide, I'm going to self publish this thing, you know, to go print it, you had to at least print X amount. So, you had to have some type of money. Let's say you were rejected by the, which is, by the way, this is, a lot of you, and I'm sure you've heard of those pulp magazines with the short stories. This was how a lot of these writers got basically also their foot in the door because they would write these short stories for these magazines, which would, obviously they had to produce stories. So yeah, they were discriminating, but it was easier to get your story, a short story published, depending on True Detective or, whatever, whatever the weird tales. They had a bunch of different, there was another one for the detective stories. This is how a lot of these authors basically got their foot in the door. And then, once they either wrote books or novels, depending on, or novelettes, things of this nature. But yeah, this you had to basically market yourself when you were an unknown. And that thing that he went to William, because remember, yeah, a lot of people don't realize when when The Exorcist came out, it was, I think, about prior to that, I think the only story, like the devil kind of story, that really, I think, Rosemary's Baby had come out before that. And that made a big giant but I'm telling you, this thing with The Exorcist, it got so much press because first of all, you know, you had a bunch of people running around saying that they were possessed. I mean, I didn't see it personally, but you heard of it, news stories, people fainting, people vomiting at the theater, uh, Catholic churches being overrun with people coming in like, exorcise me. I mean, the crazies came out of the woodworks plus, and it was just a very, I think we've become more jaded as audiences, but back then, when you saw this movie, you were like, it was very, God, it was definitely a shock and awe kind of thing, like, and really, and I've said it before, prior to, like, I want to say in the '60s, around that time, there was like a lot of low budget, um, what do you call it, devil movies, but I'm talking about bigger ones like Rosemary's Baby, this one, The Exorcist, after that, The Omen. This was prior to that, even in the '60s, like the Hammer movies. At the end of the day, Christopher Lee got a stake through his heart by Peter Cushing. In other words, the good guys won. They pulled out the cross and evil was vanquished. And with this new genre of very dark supernatural stories that came out, all right, besides the fact that they weren't hokey in the sense of, that they tried to present the characters as a normal, like, Rosemary's Baby, she's a young wife living in this building, and same thing with the setting for The Exorcist. Here's this actress, she's got a daughter, very run of the mill, and at the end, really, the evil is not truly vanquished. Obviously, in Rosemary's Baby, she has a child, which is the devil's child. All right. In other words, her husband basically sells her off. Um, in The Exorcist, yeah, the Father Damien throws himself down the stairs, which he did that, you know. And even in The Omen, I mean, that's why there were follow-ups. you know, everybody that tried to do away with the Antichrist, with Damien, basically met a very bad end. So in other words, the how's this? The inference, if not the outright message of these movies, was that the devil or Satan or whatever you want to call it was more evil was more powerful than God. evil at the end, even though they triumphed. All right. And of course, which by the way was really interesting, was that I want to say maybe with the exception of The Exorcist, but even in Rosemary's Baby and in The Omen, basically that there was a whole um, I want to say membership or group of people that were basically allied with evil. All right, that they were with cultish thinking that this was the end all be all, and you saw that with Rosemary's Baby with her neighbors. They were all witches. Even the doctor that was treating her in the first Omen movie, you know, his nanny, everybody that's surrounding him, they're put into positions around this child because they are all worship the devil. They're all devil worshippers. And then I want to say that that's, I think, one of the shock factors that happened with The Exorcist. Besides, that was a really good story, and it kind of like, I mean, people were profoundly affected by it. Believe me, this wasn't like a couple of people that just. It was like, um, it was because it was that thing of where evil triumphed, for lack of a better word. You know, Peter Cushing didn't get to put the stake through the heart of Christopher Lee, and the vampire's dead, and floats away, or some one of those deals. The dust. And I think that 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 was one of the changes that we saw in as far as the storytelling. And as a matter of fact, the John Doe, which the John Doe of the article on which William Peter Blatty based or got the inspiration for the book, was an incident that happened in 1949. The John Doe passed away in 2020, and very interesting. He ended up working for NASA as a scientist. But that's yeah. So there you go. Anyway, please come back. I have a lot of interesting guests like Ron, and I am going to bring him back. So when his book comes out, because I think it's fascinating. All right. Um, especially during that time period. I'm telling you, about that time period, I want to say that the only ones that really, really believed in possession, how's that, were the Catholics. All right. The Catholics were the only ones that had a rite of exorcism. And especially in the scientific community or academics, they kind of looked at people that believed in that like, you're so superstitious, you're so stupid. And like he explained, it was always the idea was to treat this, which by the way, I'm not saying that, yeah, there's a lot of cases that people, it's just strictly mental illness. But they were always looking at whether it was, you know, well, what they did, like a psychodynamic approach, like what they did with her was to regress her to find out what was the problem. But it was always the thought that it was strictly psychological. That's it. Psychological or a diseased brain, or but nothing's having to do with the supernatural. So for them to come to, that must be fascinating. I'm wondering, like, that background, you know, that background, and that basically this, it sounds like this demon took this child, took her over as a child, which is, I think, and it's and I really want to find out how this, because he's describing where this they did the rite of exorcism, but mostly it was, how's this for her. In other words, we're going to do this because you're Catholic and you think that doing a rite of exorcism is the remedy that you need, almost like a placebo kind of deal. But basically, what he's describing is that it really worked. Interesting, huh? Very interesting. I gotta read that book when it comes out. So anyway, guys, please sign up for my newsletter. Go to mppellicer.com. Go to miamighostchronicles.com. I will put a link to Ron's website on the credits of the show. Again, it's ronfelber.com. And Again, we're on season 15 of Stories of the Supernatural. And like I said before, I'm sorry that I'm not going to do a live stream, but I am going to have that Halloween special. All right. Because it's like a tradition. And then probably I'll do another one in 2024 for Mardi Gras because I like Mardi Gras. So again, guys, you are wonderful. Please come back every week. And I truly do appreciate you coming and spending some time with me. Take care.